Well, hello and welcome to what is the 150th episode of the A&amp podcast, B for Professional, with me, Al Coates, and him,
Ebenezer Scrooge.
Why are you calling yourself? Are you miserable?
I can't not say that.
Oh, give over.
I hate this time of year. Like, excuse me. Like, honestly, it was Monday night. Was Halloween, wasn't it? And literally, the curtains were drawn, the blinds were shut, the lights were off, the door was locked, and the amount of knocking, I can't bear it. I mean, you live up a dirt track, so you're all right. You don't get all this. Be grateful, all right? And then to add to it afterwards, you know, in the land that obviously doesn't celebrate Guy Fawkes because it is of no interest to them and it's not connected to them in any way, fireworks. And then the next day, Christmas. What is that all about? And I think the last 2 years, I've changed my name on Twitter to Ebenezer Scrooge. And I know it started off as a joke, but now it's like really serious because I just hate this time of year. There's so much expectations set on everybody and I can't be doing with it.
Well, hello and welcome to the latest edition. You miserable son. Well, I'll tell you what, can I tell you what I've been up to?
Yeah, so, I am.
And yes, you're right. I live up a dirt track, so I don't get any trick-or-treating. But in the old house, we didn't get it either. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know why, because we used to live in a double-fronted Edwardian house in the middle of a village, and so there was loads of kids living around, but they never came. And then my kids told me as we were leaving, they're going, you do know that every kid in the village thought the house was haunted. I genuinely thought it was haunted.
Really?
And I went, oh, I didn't know that. And then my kids said to me, this is true. So they're now adults. They went, oh, yeah. And we were terrified of that room in the loft. We wouldn't go in it. And I was going, what? And they were going, no, we saw things in there. Stuff got. And I was going, shut your mouth. Why the hell did you not tell me? I'd have got an exorcism or garlic or something we got to sort out. I got a priest in.
Or got the priest in or something.
So that was interesting. But what I've been doing...
Just not the priest that's been saying what he's been saying lately.
What priest?
Not that one. Have you not seen the priest who had a sermon about same-sex couples and abortions?
On the news?
This is last weekend.
Research.
Go away, have a Google, and listen to his sermon because it's disgusting. Anyway,
so what I've discovered, because I hate this time of year, it gets me really miserable, but then last year I discovered this way of taking some solace, because I miss my walks, so I started to walk in the dark. So I'm actually just walking exactly the same amount of time, exactly the same amount of places. But what I've realised is if you want to get a real buzz, a real kick of adrenaline, this is what you do, right? You get a really scary podcast, like a proper true ghost story podcast, and then you go for a walk in the woods on your own. And I'm about a mile from streetlights. That's where I live. Oh, and because you genuinely think, like I was reading one tonight and it was going, and then they saw a man in the woods, and I was walking through the woods.
I can't understand how you can do this. I
thought
really,
to myself, I thought,
honestly,
this is like I'm having a visceral physical reaction, and I'm looking over my shoulder. But what's odd is if I'm listening to like a comedy podcast, it's fine. And so you have to resist everything in your body to not run like hell or scream or keep looking over your shoulder.
I just got the shivers when you said that. I literally just got the shivers when you said, how can you do that to yourself? I don't see. I can't even watch Doctor Who, right? I'm that bad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you know when the Daleks come out and they're quite scary. That goes back to my childhood with the Daleks. But I can't. I just can't put myself in. It's like eating chilies. I can't eat chilies because I don't like spicy food. So I don't like scary things. So
I don't like horror films. I don't like them. I'm just not. I don't like the jump scare thing. But this is like so visceral. It's because it feels like, this is actually real now. It's like we're watching a film. You go, it's just manipulation. But out in the woods, you go, this is freaking real. It's not dissimilar to waving at trains, which have we talked about before on the podcast?
Yes, we have talked about your fascination with waving at trains.
It's like a physical, you have a physical response to a really peculiar thing. So you wave at a train and you feel like an idiot. And it's like it's a real rush and a real buzz. There you go. So that's what I'm doing.
Is that the same as making like the masturbation sign somebody who cuts you up in the morning?
No, it's nothing to do with that.
Is that a similar thing? Or?
Your mind is like a cesspool. Yeah, honestly.
Says you who just recorded the porn intro for the adoption and foster the A&F podcast.
I have to re-register at the end of this month. You can't be doing this.
I know. And if you want to hear that, it will be
I might put it on. I might put it on. Yeah. It was
because it was funny.
Anywho,
it was funny.
We have got a guest tonight. We've got John Radoux.
We do.
We've got John Radoux.
Yeah. Radoux.
As the French would say.
Radoux. I was
a French name.
Well, it is because it's a French pronunciation, because it's a French name, which we did ask him. And when you, because this intro is not the original intro, because Zoom played us up that night, and I sounded like
you sounded literally like you were having a funny turn.
What I sounded like, but it was
people will hear.
Yeah, it sounded like I was having something to do with the brain, which actually you will hear, yes, because it doesn't sound great. But Al's managed to fix it in some way, shape, or form with his twiddling.
Kind of. It's a very big kind of. But we took the editorial. I haven't put any of you out.
A lot of me out, I would think, in the edit.
Well, no, it's John's answering the questions. I'm asking a few questions. You're asking a few questions. When you're asking questions, it's a little bit robotic. It's a little bit distorted. You can make sense of it, and it just seemed totally unfair because John gave John gave us an evening and he chatted to us. So we didn't want to ask him to do it again.
He was a great guest.
And so please bear with the podcast. It is a tiny snippet where Scott's asking questions. You can understand what he's saying, but it's just not, not particularly pleasant.
Yeah.
No change there then.
But if you want to hear a good podcast, Scott's done.
Shut your mouth.
I've just recorded.
I don't know.
Oh, when is that going to come out? Just so we can kind of. Oh, you don't know. Probably in the year 55 when we're both dead and someone comes across.
We've got a great podcast coming up from Zach and Alison from the US. Scott did it absolutely wonderful. And to be honest, I listened to it and I thought, there's 2 podcasts here. I wish you'd done 2 because there's so well informed, and that's probably going to come out before Christmas. Anyway, that's Zach and Alison from the US, from South Carolina, and they talking about fostering and some other stuff. Anyway, shall we lead into John? And I hope everyone's doing well. We're going to do some lives over the next few months, just because the winter's here, and get some people on, do some live. Yeah.
Yes. Cheer you all up, because we're on form.
You are on fire. You're on fire this week.
And I am literally on fire. And being on fire, 25th of November, the A&F podcast conference. Boom. Mic drop.
Great lineup.
NoBordersTraining.org. Click on training and events. Amazing lineup, and we are really looking forward to it. And we've same price as last year and the year before, and not the year before, because this is the 3rd year. It's 15 quid. Get your tickets. If you can't actually attend on the day, you will receive everything afterwards. So all recorded, no editing. You hear it as it goes out. You get all the presentations and all the materials. And Angela Fraser-Wicks, Sarah Johal, someone called Paula Coates. Don't know who she is. I do know her very, very well. Dawn Harker, and there's somebody else. Who's the other person?
I wasn't listening. What were you saying? Beth Neal, Professor Dr. Beth Neal.
Yes, there's somebody else as well. Beth Neal, Professor Beth Neal. Yes. So great lineup, and obviously we will be there chairing and doing our thing. You don't even have to leave your own home if you don't want to. Yeah, you could listen on your phone,
engine bracket,
or you get it afterwards. 15 quid. Yeah, let's not go that far. NoBordersTraining.org.
And with no more ado, we have John Radoux.
Radoux.
I'm trapped in the body of a child.
I'm so pleased you recorded all this, because this couldn't happen if we were just talking.
This is
gold. Material, mate. Honestly, we are like the Ant and Dec of the podcast.
I wish I was a pound behind them. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I do as well.
Pip.
Right, anyway. Next.
We have a guest, John Radoux, who is I think if you're on Twitter and you're involved in the world that we're in, then you'll have seen John. He comes on. To quote him, he's Gobby on Twitter. Child and adolescent therapeutic counsellor, with a specific interest in sort of looked after children, care leavers, that kind of sphere and world. So, hello, John.
Hello. Hello. Slightly nervous suddenly.
Are you?
Yeah. No. I guess it's interesting because I was thinking the Venn diagram of people who listen to podcasts and the people who go on Twitter must be, there must be quite a bit of crossover.
Definitely.
But then your listenership, which you told me about before, that doesn't reflect your follower count on Twitter. So I guess there's people who listen to this who won't know who I am, which seems incredible, really.
That is a true story.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we do have quite a big Facebook
because I'm basically only known via Twitter, other than people I have a professional relationship with.
Well, we'll point people towards you on Twitter in our show notes and everything, so people can kind of get a measure of who you are and what you like to speak about. Because, like anyone, we can't kind of box you in. So, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because I think you've got a unique. You professionally, you work in a very specific area, but you've got a kind of a unique journey to that. So are you comfortable telling us a little bit about your backstory?
So I spent the majority of my childhood in care from the age of about 2.5, initially in several foster placements, one of which specifically was quite didn't treat me very well. And then a children's home, and then I lived with my dad for a bit, and then I ended up at a residential sort of EBD, boarding school for children with emotional and behavioural difficulties throughout my teens. They are still at a time where we were called maladjusted. And then, I had difficult periods in my late teens and 20s and studied photography and performing arts and didn't really settle down. And then when I was about 27, I wanted to be a social worker, and I didn't have A-levels or anything like that. And I was told, you can apply as a mature student, go away and get relevant experience, and then I could apply for training. And then I saw a job in a children's home locally, so I applied for that. I didn't think I'd get it, but I did. And then I guess quite quickly I realised that this is not a criticism of social workers, by the way, but I realised that they didn't spend an awful lot of time with the young people. And if I wanted, and that in terms of spending actual time with young people and having an influence that way, then obviously residential children's home work, you're spending, hours and hours a week with them. And I did that, and then I kind of left after a few years. I worked my way up to manager, and then I started to find it too difficult for various reasons, so I left. And then I did some other stuff, training of foster carers, sort of self-employed stuff, bit of work in a homeless hostel. And then I started working in a therapeutic community for children on the South Coast, sort of quite specialist therapeutic setup, really, for a few years. And then I decided, my interest in the sort of psychotherapeutic side had been piqued by that, really. And so I trained to be a therapist at the same time as continuing to do bank shifts in a local kids' home. And and slowly I've transitioned my career. And now, after a year or so working with foster carers, I now work, I'm commissioned by local authority to support an outreach service for young people on the edge of care. I do that 3 days a week, and then 2 days a week I work as a therapist in schools and in a room I have locally. Most of the children I see are in care or on SGOs or things of that ilk. I have a handful of private clients where they're just ordinary children whose parents are paid for them to see a therapist for a bit. And I write some stuff, I blog, I do stuff on Twitter, whatever. I've written a bit of stuff for community care and outlets like that. But yeah,
I mean, I'm
that's
conscious. Well, just that's it, really. Just listening to that sort of, I mean, that's a lifetime summarized in 2 minutes. But it seems like just totally immersed in the world of children's social care from being 2.5. Does that?
Yeah,
I mean, that's amazing.
I mean, there was a gap, but I I feel ambivalent about that a lot of the time, and I kind of I wonder about kind of how healthy that is really. I don't, I stick to these, even people who like, they go from school to university, qualified to be teachers and working at school, like their entire life is in a school. And I'm not saying, I'm not criticizing teachers who might be listening, but I just kind of, I just wonder about that. And I wonder about that for myself. And there's definitely been periods and there's definitely been periods of time where I've had more mixed feelings about it in terms of thinking, I just need to, this is not good, I need to get out of these environments. But I'm kind of more relaxed about it now, and I this is what I have to offer. I'm 46 now, so that said, I would say that I also like to see young people, some of my work as a therapist with young people who are not in care and who are not actually deeply traumatized. And, I like to do a little bit of that as well. Sometimes I feel like I'm swimming in trauma. And that doesn't always feel great. But I'm also better at making sure, but I earn more money now. So it's a bit, so I earn more money so I can have more breaks. I can do things for myself, when I was just on a children's home care worker money, and you're doing 60 hours, 70 hours a week. But, that's when I was 35, I now don't need to do that. So
there is a lot to be said, even though, we don't always work for money, but money does sometimes help to be able to take if it's
I'm just very conscious when people talk about self-care, and when I talk about self-care, that sometimes that's a bit of a kind of meme or something like that, but and employers send around emails about self-care and stuff like that as if it absolves them, but that's easy to do if you've got the money and time. If you haven't, then you can't.
So I think one of the reasons we were really keen to talk to you, there's a lot of things. I mean, you write really interesting blogs, but also just you give a commentary on a lot of stuff that's going on. I mean, specific to the care review, but also beyond that, and how we support families and children, and we're just really interested to tap into that perspective really, and just kind of, I don't know where to start really, because there's so many areas. But one of the blogs that I read recently was in relation to experts by experience, and I found that really fascinating. That is a subject matter that you felt needed addressing, and speaking from your perspective. So can you could you tell us, for people who've not necessarily read it, could you tell us what that blog was, and what was its genesis, and what are your thoughts and feelings on that movement?
Well, I think the genesis of it is, I've always been a bit, when I people find this hard to believe, but when I applied for a job in a children's home, I was under no illusions of kind of grandeur around, I because of my experience, I'll be able to offer more to these young people. My first day in the job, I was just as anxious and scared really, I guess, as any new member of staff. To be honest, I'd barely, which it seems ridiculous now, I'd barely made the connection between the fact that I had lived in the care and was now working in it. I just wanted to do a job that I thought had some kind of value really. So now I know that that's madness. Obviously there was a direct relationship between the two things, but so I've always been skeptical about how much, not that lived experience isn't of value and that it can't really inform services and that it can't inform people as a practitioner, and clearly it informs me. But I just feel like sometimes nowadays it's sort of seen as kind of the only show in town, so that was part of it. And I had I won't name them because it's not fair, but I had a conversation with someone, a care experience campaigner, who as part of the thing that they were doing was talking about wanting to be able to offer free therapy to people who they're care leavers, and whether I would be willing to play a part in that. But one of the things they said is that they thought that they would want all the therapists to be care experienced. And so I think that was the kind of point where I thought, I'm going to write something about this. I've been mulling things over around it on and off for years, but I thought, I feel, because that feels to me like, wow. And I do refer a little bit to it in the blog, this kind of idea that actually that would mean that a lot of very capable, in this example, a lot of very capable psychotherapists who could really be very helpful to young people in care or care leavers would be ruled out on that basis. And given you're trying to offer a service for free, people who might be willing to give up 2 or 3 hours a week to be part of this, so that's really what I thought, I feel like I want to address this, and I felt, but it's a complicated one, because the thing that gave me the clout to address it, I think, is the fact that I am someone with lived experience. Yeah. So it's a kind of, it's a weird one. I was using my lived experience to discursively in the blog to make my arguments about lived experience not being as important maybe all the time as people think it is, but to do that I had to be someone who had lived experience. So it's a bit, that seems a bit complicated to explain, but I was very conscious of that as I was writing the blog, that I was sort of engaged in a massive double standard, but but on the other hand, I mean, I don't really come to any, I don't think I mean, sometimes I write things, and people familiar specifically with my Twitter content, but even other stuff that I've written where I can be, I take up a very strong position. But I don't think I did that in the blog I wrote about lived experience. I was trying to say on the one hand this, on the other hand that. It's all a bit murky. That was my attempt. That's what I was attempting to do anyway.
I find it really interesting, because I think the reason that I became aware of you was because of your opinions, should I say. I was going to use another word, but I don't think that's fair. Your opinions on the care review and where that came from. And what I found really interesting, because that blog, actually, I read it probably within the same couple of hours as Al read it. And we both, when he said to me, we need to get you on, we both kind of agreed with that, because it's interesting when sometimes when people are kind of on Twitter, you get 100 and whatever characters it is to be able to explain yourself, and that's really tricky and really, really hard to do without coming across as, perhaps someone that people might not want to engage with. But I think that blog for me really kind of defined you as an individual, because we're all very we can all very much take that kind of approach to, if we're asked to do something, we're just going to do it, because actually we are using our own experience to be able to share. But actually there's a big difference between having my experience, Al's experience, your experience. They're all very different. So what I found really intriguing about the blog was that whilst we listen, actually everybody's experience is very different, and that doesn't necessarily make them an expert. And I think, I know that was the essence of the blog.
I think that's, this is a slightly kind of, maybe this analogy is not going to quite work, but I'm going to use it anyway. If to take a sort of trivial example, if the three of us went to watch a film at the cinema, okay, we've had basically exactly the same experience for 2.5 hours, but we might come away from that feeling and thinking quite different things about that experience. So even when people, you know, we understand, you guys will understand certain kind of things that we might consider symptomatic of developmental trauma, for example, you know, so there are similarities, you know, but much of what makes us who we are and how we experience things is basically unknown, you know. You know, so there are lots of examples of thinking, oh, but that young person had that kind of experience and they seem to be basically fine, and that other young person had those experiences and they're really finding life very, very difficult. And you know, and the reasons for that are pretty unknown. So it's inevitably it's kind of it's a mistake, really, and it's a mistake that people with lived experience make. You know, especially in children's social care, I can't speak for other fields as much, whereas they actually massively over-identify with someone that they have a professional role with, because they imagine that the young person feels the same way about something, and because they've had superficially similar experiences, they imagine that the young person's experienced that in the same way as they have, but they might not, you know.
I was listening to Max Hastings, who's sort of the eminent historian, and he was addressing this idea of how do you gather facts about things that have happened. He said in reality people are really bad witnesses to events. He said that for a whole host of reasons, time, personality, perspective, a whole raft of things, they're very bad at. He said, but what they're immeasurably good at is they're telling you how they felt about a thing and how they experienced a thing. He said they'll maybe get the dates wrong, the time, you know, all of that. The landscape of what they're telling is just not great. There's other ways to get that, but to say what it feels like, it's just there's no other way of capturing it so well. And I was thinking about the current. I don't want to say fashion, but maybe it is a fashion towards lived experience. Or maybe the swing towards lived experience. Do you think that is it? I mean, do we have to reset the counter? We need that, but do you think that there's a danger that we maybe take that to a place where it's not helpful?
I don't want to be seen, certainly, as part of some kind of revisionist thing, sort of rubbishing like the value of lived experience. And I guess there's two strands to it. There's being a sort of a practitioner of some kind with lived experience, you know, and how valuable or otherwise that is, you know, and then there's the sort of systems change kind of thing and co-production of kind of, you know, and obviously things like the EBE board for the care review. Now, when so I think the original reason I became associated with the care review is because I composed a letter that I sort of made available for people to sign, and I wanted people who had professional personal experience in the care system to sign it, and I sent it off to Gavin Williamson. This was when the Conservative Party had included in their manifesto that they wanted to review the care system, and it was really just a way of trying to, you know, I mean, it was a very optimistic act, but a way of trying to kind of make sure that that was done properly. Now, in that letter, which I wrote, I, you know, emphasised the importance of it involving people with care experience, lived experience of the care system. At that point, the Conservative manifesto had said the care system, it hadn't said a wider review of children's social care. So at that point, I guess, in terms of lived experience, I was thinking people who've been in care in some way. So, and I was very keen for that to happen. And I'm, you know, and I have to say, my personal view is that there's value, and I don't think you'll be surprised to hear, and won't be surprised to hear the review did this very well, but there's value in just listening to people's stories, you know, that some of the value of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, of course, it's important what comes out in these reports and recommendations and potential legislation changes to protect children in the future. That's really important. But actually just them taking testimony and hearing these people's experiences and recording that, and that's important too. And so irrespective of sort of final outcomes of the review, I always thought it, well, not irrespective, but in addition to final outcomes of the review, I always thought it was important that people got their chance to say something. I will add a caveat though, which is, if you're saying to people, if you're promising change and you're taking people's, and you're getting people to really, you know, unpack their stories for you and all of that kind of stuff about how they experience being in care, and you're saying, we need this information because we're going to try and change the system so that it doesn't happen to other young people. That's essentially what the message is. And you don't deliver that change, then that's a big problem, you know, because you're talking about a cohort of people who have throughout their, a lot of them during their time in care will have felt unheard, not listened to, you know, and to then say, come on, trust us, and then not deliver, and then to break that trust, that's
worse than not asking.
Yeah, that is problematic. You know, and it is difficult, you know, because I don't think the selection process for the EBE board for the care review was done as well as it could have been. That, you know, obviously I think that really, but we've got to be honest, there would always have to be some kind of selection process. That would always involve people applying to do something and being told that they couldn't. There is no other way around it. And we would have always been, people would have always been unhappy with that process, you know, and it would have always been very, very difficult to protect people from that rejection. You know, they could have done it better than, look, I applied to be on the EBE board, if I'm honest, partly out of mischief and partly because I genuinely wanted to see what the process was like. You know, and I was just, I mean, I think it was still in the big lockdown early in 21, wasn't it? And I was just out for my daily walk, and I got the email pop up on my phone, you know, a pretty cold kind of almost job rejection kind of, you know, of that ilk. Not awful, but not great. And I was conscious that, you know, I wasn't ever expecting to get picked. And I have a voice anyway, you know, I'm on a podcast with you guys. I speak to people, heads of charities, and I write blogs and people read them. And, you know, if I wanted to get something put in CYP Now or community care, I probably could. So I'm not voiceless, but lots of people who might have applied would have been effectively. And so I was very conscious that wasn't really good enough, you know. I'm off a bit, sorry, I slightly lost my voice.
No, you're fine. But I was going to say as well, I mean, you know, again, I don't know the full process because I didn't apply for it. I know that there was another person in the room that did apply for it, but he can talk about that in a minute. Yeah, but also it seemed to be quite an online process. So, you know, if you were on social media, then you knew about it. So therefore you could apply. But what about those that perhaps weren't on social media and, you know, all that kind of stuff? That was my first thought.
It's interesting, isn't it? I had a conversation with long before the review was announced, but as when I was campaigning around it, was a fairly senior civil servant at the DfE, who seemed to genuinely want my thoughts about how to do this review thing, and particularly about how to do the lived experiencing. There was a few of you do it through charities and stuff, which is interesting because that's come back for the implementation board. You know, she was genuinely kind of curious about that, and I was clear at that point is, you know, how, you know, people like me, for as much as I have difficulties, and actually, you know, young people on children in care councils and so on and so forth, okay, they've had very difficult experiences and they're doing great things, but okay, they are not the young people who get bounced around 10 foster placements and 6 residential homes in their teens. You know, they're not the ones in the homeless hostels, the mental health wards, the prisons. That's just a reality. And so I was always saying, you know, you need to find a way of speaking to these people. You need, you know, you have to, you obviously, they're not going to be on no EBE board, let's be realistic, but how do you find them? You know, and you can't do that via Twitter. And I mean, sometimes it felt like the whole thing was a Twitter thing. I mean, and to be fair, you know, I don't want to sort of turn this into a kind of tit for tat with Josh McAllister via your podcast, but he did announce his chairmanship of the review on Twitter. That he did. I mean, I knew it was coming, you know, because it had been leaked the day before, and if you were in the know, you knew these things. You know, that's well, you know, someone called me and told me, so I knew it was coming. I then told a couple of people, as is the way of things, but you know, so I didn't expect. I mean, it's so unhealthy that I wake up at 7 a.m. and look at my phone and check Twitter before I've had a coffee. Obviously, that's mad. I don't do that anymore. But straight away, it was, you know, probably that he'd scheduled, but a quite lengthy Twitter thread from Josh at 7 o'clock on whatever it was, the 15th of January 2021, announcing both the review and the fact that he was chairing it. So in some respects, you know, and he then copped some grief, including from me, of course, but, you know, in some respects, it was sort of started as it ended up going on, which became this kind of Twitter thing, which you know, I know there was other ways that they reached out to people. I don't want to rubbish all of it, but that was, you know, that it was a social media event, wasn't it? Really, I guess partly because a lot of it was happening during lockdowns and stuff initially, wasn't it? So, you know, trying to be generous, but yeah. I certainly, I'm not here to defend Josh, and I think that he came on to the podcast, you know, we asked and he said yes, so we why wouldn't we let him on? And I think I'm a pragmatist by nature, and I kind of like, the tension was that, you know, he was open that this is a government with a large majority, or it was. I have no idea what the hell's happening today. Check my watch, check Twitter. But it was a government with a large majority. They had the opportunity to do a review and get any legislative changes done within a parliamentary period, while they still had a majority. Whether that is still going to happen, I don't know. But that we seem to be in this place now where who knows actually what is going to be taken forwards. Or do you think it's a done deal? So I'll just go back a little step. So interestingly, I also consider myself a pragmatist. That might surprise some people, including people who know me very well. But I was kind of, look, I've been involved in conversations, you know, about who might head up the review, not like with important people, just idle chatter about who it should be, you know, who it might be, so who I thought it should be, you know, all of those kind of conversations. And I knew that because I partly because I'd written this letter and so on and so forth, that really I was going to, when it was announced, I was going to have to sort of take a position. I wouldn't have to, but, you know, I felt under some pressure to. And I imagined, my fear was that something that not brilliant but okay was going to happen, and that I was going to be one of the people going, look, you know, this is our only hope of change. This, you know, it's not going to be everything we want, but let's compromise, you know, let's engage, etc., etc., etc. So I was worried that I was going to alienate some people that I'm usually allied to. You know, that was my anxiety, because I thought I was going to come out and support pretty much whatever was announced. So maybe it says something about my psychology a little bit, but I was a bit disappointed to find out that I was a online malcontent, as the social work tutor described as. And honestly, I accept too that there would never be a kind of, you know, these people have got to be appointed by someone. So the idea, there's no philosophically impossible to have a kind of completely independent review. I accept that too. Yeah. But I think we could all, if we're honest, I'm going to put words in people's mouths, but imagine a more independent review. You know, I think we could, you know, my personal view was that I wanted it to be a retired family court judge. I think people won't like this, but I think it would have been better for it to be someone at the end of their career, not towards the beginning. I think that frees people up.
It would give us certainly a different tone, wouldn't it, to the whole experience? But do you think that decision, because obviously I remember having a conversation, I can't remember who with, or maybe I can, but I shouldn't maybe say, but, and they sort of were quite pragmatic, and they said, they've got to choose someone they can work with, the DFE or the ministers. And if you put someone like a retired judge who would probably be a bit more, I don't want to say thorough, but a bit more methodical, a bit slower, a bit more measured, that you would have never got it through within that time slot that they had. So do you think that it was no more than that, just like, this is going to get it done quick? If we pick him and he cracks on.
Right. I would have liked to see something more genuinely set up to be kind of cross-party from the start, really. And I know sort of when the review was announced, the whoever was the Labour Education Shadow at the time tweeted positively, and there's been a bit of that kind of stuff. But I would have liked to see it. So I wouldn't have. My personal view is that it shouldn't. The kind of legislative time scale was neither here nor there. Obviously, you don't want a review that drags on for years and years. I think a year was too short, given the complexity. But I don't. There's a balance to be struck. I guess Look, had it just been a kind of government policy review like they have, and, a kind of, I'm not criticising these people, but a kind of Martin Mary type thing or whatever, I wouldn't have been over the moon about it, but so what, really? These things happen. My problem was that it was being sold as something else. I mean, some of it, I'm not saying this is what actually happened, but I was just aware of it. Some of the lines being used were lines that I'd used in my letter, that lots of people signed, a once in a generation opportunity, political, blah, blah, blah. And so they were promising something else. And there was something that was quite towards the start when Josh, who I agree, by the way, who I've met 3 times via Zoom, and I agree he's very amiable. I don't think he's the spawn of Satan or anything like that. But when he
breaking news, John Radoux says he's not the spawn of Satan.
He'll be relieved to hear.
Yeah, I'm going to message him now.
There was in one of his responses to whether there'd be a team, on Twitter, he said, as is usual for reviews of this kind, and he was referring to the fact that the team would be civil servants. And that sort of gave the game away to me a bit, because I'm like, but we're not asking for a review of this kind. We've been asking for something unique, and you're sort of promising something unique. But on the other hand, you're saying it's just going to be the same old thing. I don't care about how every other independent review or review has been conducted in the history of UK public affairs. I care about this review, and we're asking for something different. That was my kind of starting point, really. And look, I mean, I want to move on for one second. I do not want to be identified with the review. I agree with what you were saying earlier. Now it's this implementation board, and they're implementing. No one knows what the government policy is.
Absolutely.
So I don't really know how they can implement it.
To be fair, nobody really knows who the ministers are.
It's a real shame. And actually, I heard Will Quince on your podcast. I'm a member of the Labour Party, so I'm probably to the left of Keir Starmer, so obviously Will Quince is not, but he seemed thoughtful, he seemed sincere, as much as I was, and I was disappointed that he didn't stay in his role, not least because he was across the brief a little bit, so I felt really pretty sad about that, honestly. That's another headline. John says towards the worker. Right now.
And on that bombshell, no.
So, I mean, just relaying this back to your blog, I guess. So the I don't want to use the word panel because that means something else, but the expert by experience people that they used for the review.
Yeah, it was the EBE board.
Yeah,
that's what they called it.
I always find it fascinating when you've got an acronym, how people pronounce it. Because you know, when I worked at Adoption UK, the acronym was to me it was AUK, and then people called it AUK, and I was like, what you say? So it's always interesting to hear other people's kind of, you know, how their brain works in terms of. But so I mean, you didn't have anything against these people. It was just a fact of maybe the selection process, or you know, or what? I'm not pulling into the long grass, and we can always edit this out if you don't want to answer that question. I'm just interested to hear, because I feel like some of those people really are quite valuable to what they've done and what they've achieved and what they may go on to do. Can't talk about the future because we don't know, but you know.
I'm going to answer it, but in a slightly roundabout way.
No, dude.
On the application form to be on the EBE board, I can't remember the exact wording without pulling it up, but one of the sort of requirements, for want of a better word, is that you were someone who was able to kind of communicate, I think, succinctly and in a kind of respectful way. And obviously, you know, you can be on Zoom calls with people. You don't want people kicking off left, right, and centre. I get that, but you know, on the other hand, that is quite a barrier, because this is something which you know, especially if they've got lived experience, raises passions, and people feel strongly about it, and people might not, and I don't always, might not articulate themselves in the best way possible, and you know, by the act of having this review, you're almost kind of lancing a boil. There's a lot of stuff here, you know, some of that spilled out on Twitter, including by me, members of the EBE board, other people. You know, I'm not proud of every interaction that I've had around the review on Twitter. I don't think I ever abused Josh McAllister. I'm confident I never did. I said robust things, but that's not the same thing. But I in other interactions, definitely. I regret an early interaction with Jenny Malloy. I regret quite a lot of my interactions with Chris Hoyle. You know, I don't take full responsibility for what happened in those interactions, but I regret my part in them. You know, but I accept that the people who were chosen from the EBE board are entirely reasonable people to speak to, but they were people with existing profiles as campaigners, and that would have been the same if they'd picked me, of course, you know. And maybe if they picked me, would I be saying, oh well, they picked the same old faces? But it's quite, they wanted a certain type, I think. That I would go as far as to say that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And I think it reflected just the speed at which it was all done. And as you say, that there's a clear drive behind it to get it done within a 5 years and within the parliamentary term. And that's woven into the DNA, every aspect of it. Because as you were saying, I'd have loved, I mean, there's just been the human rights, the all-party group on adoption, forced adoption, historic forced adoption, and everyone's been able to submit evidence, and that's been sort of broad. It's a very big net that's been cast out there, you know, and there's been challenges, and of course it's always difficult, but as you said, to get the less heard voices, that takes time and it takes a bit of investigation. It needs to send someone like yourself off and go away and get the less heard voices, get off Twitter, go and get them, you know. Well, you know, but literally, as you said, the people who, I often think this in relation to all aspects of social care. You know, the adoptive families, that, you know, that's our expertise. The adoptive families are just getting on with their lives. They're just getting on with it. Yeah. They're not in this space, and there'll be hundreds of thousands of people who've got strong opinions about this, but don't feel.
Oh, I mean, you know, I've continued to work with children in social care throughout this period, and most people I come across, social workers, residential workers, foster carers, know, at first I didn't have a clue that the review was happening. Yeah. You know, that, you know, that, like, you know, it was not as high profile as it could have been. I regret that it wasn't high profile for another reason, which is that this would have been a good opportunity to really make the public, if they'd wanted to, if they'd really driven it, they could have had all kinds of stuff on the news and in the mainstream media. There was bits, but this was a real opportunity to just raise awareness of the lives of children in care and children and families around social work, children's social care, the role of social workers. Do you know what I mean? All of this could have been much more high profile, and I think it was a missed opportunity. You know, and even stuff like, you know, I mean, it leaked, and we, you know, lots of, you know, this is a bit kind of exclusionary, but lots of people in the know, including myself, had copies of the review report the weekend before it was announced. However, they did try to keep that secret. Why did they do that? Why didn't they have a big fanfare, you know, about this report? Why? I just don't understand all that stuff, you know. This is stuff that you know, lots of people, of course, complaining about the Scottish review and the promise and stuff haven't delivered in the way that people hoped. So I don't know enough to really fully comment, but there's no question it was much more high profile. The day we all knew for weeks that when it was coming out. I found it quite emotional, and I watched Nicola Sturgeon the day that it came out give a quite long and passionate speech to the Scottish Parliament. You know, it was a big deal, you know.
An opportunity,
and so I feel sad about that. You know, do you think Boris Johnson was even aware there was a care review going on under his watch? Probably not, you know.
I think he was out party, probably. I don't know, I'm just...
He's a bad example, maybe, but I feel genuinely sad about it. Because, you know, and I look, there's lots of children in care who are minding their own business in foster care and don't want to be aggroed by a kind of review. You know, of course not. You know, they're doing fine, thank you very much. And but my concern is that there's still lots and lots of children and young people who have like foster placements in double figures. You know, this is like or a completely unsatisfactory experiences leaving care and all of these things. You know, I could waffle on, but you know, for me, the thing about the review was this has to deliver something that really makes the experience of being in care, which is not good enough for lots of children, better. You know, I mean, I know that sounds a bit kind of wishy-washy, but you know, and I said to Josh when I first met him, you know, I have to see a route to that happening. I have to, you know, and I don't see it, and I don't see it now. In fact, it seems almost a bit anachronistic to talk about this review. It just seems like so what now? It raised a lot of passions, but so what? And it's going to be this implementation board, and they'll do some of the stuff and not some of the other stuff. Do I think that the life of a single child in the care of the state is going to be meaningfully improved by the outcomes of this review? I'm afraid I don't. You know, and I feel genuinely bereft. I feel emotional now talking to you. And so some of that upset comes out on Twitter in ways that is probably not productive.
Well, you're here and we get to talk to you, so you know. But it's an interesting thing because over my time of working, I'm not a social worker, not even qualified. I've got a few GCSEs and that's about it. So my experience comes from my experience, if that makes sense. But I think what's interesting is that it would be amazing to be able to get the voice of young people in a really kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I forget words these days, sorry. In a really kind of in a way that meant something. But you know, we've got all these children in foster care who are going through all this stuff at the minute, and it's not until they've kind of grown up or moved on or whatever until we get their opinions and their voice and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's quite a sad state of affairs, to be perfectly honest. And I know that from my own experience with my own children. You know, we didn't get to hear a lot of their experiences until years later, and a lot of it shouldn't have happened. So I think I kind of agree with you, John, in some ways, because, well, in a lot of ways, because I don't think that this is going to change much for the children that are in care now. I think that a lot of it could potentially change could have changed the experience that those 10, 20 years ago had, because that's now the voices that we're hearing. But I don't think it's going to change much for those in the care system now, because things do move on as well.
I mean, I suppose to add balance, what I would say is clearly, we've moved on from founding hospitals and workhouses, haven't we? The sort of overall, there's an arc of progress here or whatever, That said, and this will probably might irritate some of my left-wing friends, where there's an argument about there needs to be more investment, which absolutely does. But I worked in the care system during what is now considered the sort of largesse of the Blair years, where there was where things were arguably properly funded, and it was just as rubbish then, and that's the reality. And all the things that we thought were inadequate then remain as inadequate now, and apart from a few things that have kind of got worse, But on the other hand, look, of course, I'm if a young person who's had like 20 placements, that's not good enough. But I've also been in situations where I've been part of conversations and making decisions about having to move a young person on, because these are very complicated dilemmas sometimes. There's other children involved, there's other people involved. This isn't straightforward. There isn't some kind of magic solutions here. I don't have all the answers, which is why I campaigned for a care review, and if I just thought it was about investment, then I'd have campaigned for investment, not a review. So,
but is there also, sorry to keep banging on about it, is there also a lot of disappointment amongst those who were really depending on this being a once in a lifetime? Because if that was said in that kind of respect, it's once in a lifetime, that means that we're never going to see anything like this again, and any kind of changes that are made, whether big or small, that's it. I wrote a piece for a social work journal, an online one that was about during COVID, and then they brought back a special issue for the care review. What will happen now is for years and years we will be told that we had the review that we asked for, and we won't have.
But that leads me, I was going to ask, because obviously there's in you and some of your peers, there's still a sense of momentum and a desire for change, and I think arguably the review hasn't scratched that itch. It's looking at other things in a way that isn't what you wanted. Well, is there somewhere else that you want to put your energy? That was my question, is what are you going to do? I mean, do you want something
that's a good question. I mean, Netflix won't watch itself, so there's that. But I think for me, largely it will be about putting my energy into my own work, really, and doing what I can in that regard. I probably won't just temperamentally and I just need to say stuff, so I'm not sort of going to disappear in that regard. But I think that there's two positions, not there's more than one, two positions, that's wrong, but there's a couple of ways that people think about it. So you can go for a kind of incremental change that you can really kind of do your bit to deliver. So someone like Terry Galloway, who's going around, this is really valuable stuff, going around local authorities and trying to persuade them to do a version of care experience being a protected characteristic and other stuff like that, and people can do those kinds of campaignings which do, they matter. My view, strongly held view really, is that these are children in the care of the state, and unless there is really strong political will in government, not just in local authorities, but in government, then you will struggle to really get enough change to make a material difference to the lives of children in care. And I guess I will continue to. I sort of do worry that I'm just a sort of naysayer, really, and that I'm always complaining about stuff and sending out freedom of information requests and stuff like that. I don't really, I want to, I'd like to say some more positive things than that. I wrote a chapter for a book that will come out next year about the care system and my view on how to look after children in care, those kind of things. I think I can have an influence that way. I guess I can do some more writing when I get the time and inspiration. And, there's we all have our own way of doing these things, I guess, but it would be difficult to campaign for a care review. I just, for what it's worth, actually, in retrospect, I think we should have campaigned for an inquiry. I think that's a different thing. I look at, there'll be things around ICSA which lots of people be unsatisfied by, but that level of a kind of thing, also because then I think it's sort of, they were basically left to their own devices. No one was interfering with what they were getting up to once it was set up. And so I think it should have been more like that. I regret that, but I don't think there's anything we can do about that now.
Well, you don't know, with a new government coming in and the shift, I think, well, not a new government coming in, but there's a feeling that this is the dying days of the Tory party, isn't it? That feels like, who knows what the future holds, but
but this could be a bleak time for local authorities in terms of their funding over the next couple of years. I mean, one thing I strongly feel, I wish I could say this to a kind of politician that mattered really, is that, look, there's legitimate conversations to be had. For example, I come down on a certain way, but legitimate conversation, for example, around the level of benefits and how much the state helps people and how much they're encouraged to help themselves. I have a view on that, but I accept the discussion is legitimate. There's legitimate discussion even about how much you can fund the health service, or how much of that could be done privately. These, I come down on a certain side, but they're real legitimate discussions. But to my mind, if you're going to remove children from the care of their parents, and we do need to do that sometimes, but if you're going to do that, that's such a huge thing for the biggest, other than perhaps long-term prison sentence, the way the state can interfere in someone's life, and the children involved, in the way that you could argue that people in prison, adults in prison, had some agency over what they did. The children involved have no agency. Not they have no agency at all in their lives, but they have no agency about whether they do or do not come into care, and whether they do or do not remain with this foster care or this in this children's home or whatever. They're just buffeted around, and so the responsibility we have as a society to do that properly, that it should be absolutely 100% protected from any momentary fiscal concerns, or, the UK is a wealthy nation, and it can afford to do this properly, and it should absolutely be protected from whatever crisis we're in at the moment. And it could be, and because yes, it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in terms of what states fork out for things, and what is it, 80, whatever it is, 100,000 kids in care, it's a lot of children, but it's we can afford to look after them properly.
And we know that then, in looking after those children, giving them the best possible start, then it's cost effective in the long term. But that's money that's down the line of someone else, so it's not seen that. Can I ask you one question, because I'm conscious we've taken a lot of time? You mentioned protected care leave as a protected characteristic. We've had a few people who've come on over the summer. What are your thoughts on that one thing from the review about it becoming a protected?
Well, firstly, my thought is, for the recommendation of the review to be properly enacted, that requires And again, I've great respect for what Terry and people are doing, but that requires a change to primary legislation, an amendment via probably some kind of other act of parliament to the Equality Act, and to name it as a protected characteristic. Without that, it's not really a protected characteristic in any way that has meaning in law. So that's my first position. My second aspect of it is that, and this is difficult because ultimately I'm not convinced that what would be an ever-growing number of protected characteristics is the best way to achieve a more equitable society. You know, but there will be people perhaps who already have one of those protected characteristics who might disagree with me, so I don't know. But I personally, I'm sure about that as a route. I think whether people like it or not, there will become difficulties around how you define care experience. If you're going to make it a protected characteristic, you're going to have to define it, and inevitably that's going to upset some people, and palpably, you know, people will bristle. But the experience of staying with an aunt for a few months while your parents were going through a difficult time is potentially not the same as being bounced around foster care and residential care for 16 years. Yeah. It's you know, so that'll be a problem. Do I think it will make any difference? I think it might make some difference around the fringes when I think of the kind of, you know, campaigns against children's homes in areas and stuff like that, and that kind of, even the way even now care experience people can be described in the media, that you just wouldn't, you know, that I think it could make some difference, but not really. I don't think a 9-year-old in foster care's life is going to be improved one way or the other by whether or not being care experience is a protected characteristic, you know. But, you know, I don't feel passionately about it that I'm going to campaign against the idea, you know. I think it's...
And on that bombshell.
Oh, that's interesting, really interesting. And like I said earlier, we've taken up a lot of your time, but I think that anybody who reads your tweets will probably either totally agree with you in the first instance, or this is what I was talking about actually, that they totally agree with you in the first instance, or they go away and think about what you said and then kind of go, oh, actually, because that's what I find myself doing. I'm not talking about our tweets earlier tonight because that was a completely different thing. Matt Hancock going into the I'm a Celeb jungle, but I missed them. I don't watch telly, so there's no point in me.
All right, okay.
But yeah, it's fascinating to read some of your tweets, because I think that there's a lot of people who are quite angry about things. But actually, when I read your tweets, it's not that the anger doesn't come through, it's just that the passion comes through. And I think that's what I appreciate about being able to read and then go away and think and then come back and then go, yeah, actually, that's right, or that's, you know, maybe I don't 100% agree, but, you know, it's still a valid point. And I think that's the main thing about being able to communicate on these platforms, isn't it? That, you know, we've all got our own opinions, and that's the way it should be.
I mean, honestly, the majority of my stuff I post on media is trite, really, but or you know, where I've got caught up in you know, a pointless argument with an anonymous account, but where I do say things that you know, that seem to, you know, I get a response from in some way that seems to sort of hook into something that's people are thinking and feeling, or whatever, or just make people think about something in a different way. That's normally because that's currently within my frame somewhere, you know. So you know, I obviously have to be, you know, obviously have to respect all kinds of confidentiality stuff, but normally that's because or there's been you know, a series of things that have happened, and I'm thinking, you know, this isn't really good enough, you know.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I think that it's been fantastic to kind of get sort of scratch beneath some of that Twitter content, because I think that there is, the story's not the story, is there? And you've articulated really well a lot of your perspectives and views that I think people really appreciate. So, John, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
We wish you well with whatever you're up to. You are a human dynamo, watching watching Netflix, sending off freedom of information requests.
I mean, you can do those things at the same time, to be honest. But,
well, it's a perfect night in for you, there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Multitasking us at its finest.
Yeah. So look after yourself, and we'll speak to you on Twitter soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.